Coming to you from an undisclosed location deep in the heart of the Santa Monica Mountains, I'm your intrepid host, L.A. Marzulli, and this is Politics, Prophecy, and the Supernatural Report. In PPS studio with my good friend and battle buddy, Bill Salus. Bill, great to have you here.
L.A., it's
always
good to be
good,
here.
definitely.
It is, absolutely.
Listen, let's get right into it. And I blogged about this today, the fact that Obama, at the last minute, gives $221 million to the Palestinians. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I read that article too. It was incredible. You know, the article says he was unable to give them a state, but as he's exiting out, he's able to give them $221 million. I think that shows the true color, the true face of his presidency. He was anti-Israel and pro-Palestinian.
For 8 years, basically.
Yeah, basically. And, you know, fortunately, I don't think it's been irreparable damage. We've got Donald Trump coming in now and a Republican-dominated administration, which is very pro-Israel. And it looks like right out the gate, talk about moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, maybe dealing with that Iran deal. These are good indications that will embolden Israel. And also probably neutralize Russia, which is another key thing we need to think about.
Huge thing, but I want to double back here for a second. And I want to put the whole moving the embassy to Jerusalem, because I talked about that in a PBS update, and I want to talk to you about that. So we'll table that just for a second. Let's go back to Obama, the $221 million gift to the Palestinians. Is this an act of an emperor? I mean, he just does this with a stroke of a pen.
Well, and didn't he do a lot of that with his executive privilege? Executive orders and things like that. And that's taxpayer money, by the way.
Exactly.
You know, so, you know, dear viewers, you're going to be paying for that.
So the idea of, for 8 years, there's been like a kibosh over Israel from our government, from Obama. And Netanyahu, I mean, he snubbed Netanyahu. He told, remember that one time when Netanyahu was traveling from Israel to the United States, and Obama states that Israel should move back to the pre-67 borders, which of course is national suicide. A couple of weeks ago, 70 nations met in Paris, talked about, the bottom line there was Israel should move back to its 67 borders. Your thoughts on that? What happens if Israel is stupid enough to do something like that?
Well, I personally don't think they will. It would be committing suicide, national suicide for them. You know, many of the viewers, Christian and secular, of course, are very familiar with the worldview. But, you know, I'm looking at the biblical narrative and the prophetic perspective. The bottom line is this stuff is not biblically endorsed. It does talk about the Israeli Defense Forces becoming empowered to defend the nation, fighting a war with peripheral prophecies and wars around that to secure themselves and defend their nation. Psalm 83, Jeremiah 49 dealing with Jordan, the toppling of Jordan, and elsewhere. Damascus being destroyed by the Israeli Defense Forces.
Which is unbelievable.
I was on the Marcus and Joni Daystar TV show. At the time, John Kerry was doing his final push on the Israeli-Palestinian peace talk, and Joni asked me, she goes, well, if you were in front of John Kerry, what would you tell him right now? And I said, you know, I would put his attention to Jeremiah chapter 12, verses 14 through 17, I believe it is, which says, look, God has a peace plan in place already, and the international community is far from it. And God said, listen, I will pluck out my evil neighbors, which is what he called the Arabs surrounding Israel that had gone into Israel. I'll put them back in their lands, and I will pluck out the Jews from those lands and put them back into their land, and I will have compassion on everybody, bring them back to their own heritages and things like that. So it was a great peace plan, right? And he gave them all that land after the Ottoman Empire. Remember, he just divvied out all the land. The Arabs got all their states and all this stuff, and then Israel gets their state in 1948. The plan was in action. But he has this caveat. He says, and I will bless you if you worship me like you taught my children to worship Baal. And at that time, when Jeremiah spoke, the children of the southern kingdom of Judah were sacrificing their children to Baal. They were idolizing this.
Sure.
He said, if you will just focus on the God of the Bible, right, and I will have compassion on all of you. But he says, if you don't, I will utterly pluck up and destroy that nation. See, this is a prophecy. This is a promise. They're not worshiping God. They're worshiping Allah. They're imploding since the Obama administration, the Arab Spring and all this sort of stuff. So at some point, Psalm 83 is going to happen. At some point, these nations are going to be destroyed because they're out of compliance with God's plan. And we're not, of course, we're not wishing that. But he also has foreign policy in Genesis chapter 12, where he says 4,000 years ago to the Gentiles, "I'll bless those who bless Abraham," and goes on through his descendants, Jewish people today. "But I must curse those." It's very forceful language in the Hebrew. "I must curse those who curse them." Because that was the redemption plan of man through the Abrahamic covenant.
Sure,
And
Messiah came through the seed.
Yeah, if you're going to bless that plan, and Jesus Christ the seed, "I'll bless all the families of the earth through him," it says in that prophecy. Great, but if you're going to get in the way, that's a problem.
You and I have discussed this many times before, the idea of the Psalm 83 war. And right now, Israel is surrounded by Hamas in Gaza, which is sworn to Israel's utter destruction. You've got Hezbollah in the north. And we talked about numbers, 150,000 rockets, many of them retrofitted. Even Iron Dome. If Iron Dome is working at 100% capacity, they can't get all the rockets, which means we're looking at casualties. Then you've got ISIS happening. You've got the Iranians, which are saying death to Israel. Where do you think all this is going?
Well, I think it's going toward wars of epic biblical proportions. We know they're coming. The question is how soon and how powerful will they be?
Do you see it triggering one, triggering the other, like Psalm 80, or let's say Isaiah 17, triggering Psalm 83, which then triggers Ezekiel 38? What do you see?
Yeah, okay, I'll just lay this out kind of chronologically
Please.
as I see it. I see the Trump presidency coming in, and it's going to embolden Israel. It's going to neutralize Russia. It's going to kind of have to, Iran's going to have to kind of get out of the Syrian equation over there, which means Hezbollah is going to have to get out as well. I think they're going to be dealing with the Houthis down there. Saudi Arabia is going to try to line up a little bit with the Jews a little bit because they're concerned about Iran.
They have to.
And
Yeah,
with
sure.
Trump, Egypt's they're not going to want to get in the Psalm 83 war yet. I think certain things are going to happen that the Arab world's going to be just fuming when the embassy moves, and it probably will move to Jerusalem.
Which is another discussion. We'll get to that in a second.
Yeah, they'll be outspoken. They'll try to go to the international community. They're going to threaten it's a declaration of war, but that probably won't happen immediately. They'll probably tolerate it until they can muster up all the propaganda they can get. Russia's going to try to figure out what their move is. Probably going to have to get out a little bit of the Syrian thing. Iran's going to start to get upset. And Israel's going to get emboldened. They're going to build more properties. They're going to go into the settlements. They're going to build more houses. It's going to be a real convoluted, dangerous situation. And I think something happens with Iran and Israel.
Now,
That's where it starts.
Okay. Do you think that there's a supernatural component to all of this? I mean, is there? What are your thoughts there? Is there a supernatural component? What is that?
It all boils down to the fact that Satan wants to ultimately destroy the Jewish people. That's why through the Antichrist, he will commit the ultimate attempt of genocide, and we find on Zechariah 13, verse 8, that 2/3 of the Jews will be cut off at that time. 1/3 of remnant will come through. The reason being, because God made a promise that his seed would bruise Satan's seed's head, and Satan's seed would bruise his heel. And Jesus said also that he will not return until the Jews say, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." So in other words, the point is, if the Jews don't exist, they can't say, "Blessed is he who's going to come in the name of the Lord." He can't return. They want Jesus not to return. They want him stranded in heaven. That's what Satan wants. And so that's why the Jews have always had a bullseye on their back. I mean, I'm just giving you a brief overview.
I agree.
This goes into a whole complex understanding.
It's a great overview.
But it's like your Cosmic Chess Match book, that great book where you got,
Thank you.
You make a move, God makes a move, Satan makes a counter move. And it's always a counter. It's always a counterfeit. Because God knows the end from the beginning. Satan only knows the end from the beginning because he knows God's word. Yes, that's right, folks. Satan knows Bible prophecy. Don't you think he doesn't? He watches this stuff, okay? Probably knows it better than most of us. But what baffles him is when some guys like you or me come along and God gives us an inspirational moment where we get an epiphany about some scripture, some prophecy, and we go, wow, they figured it out through their faith, through their relationship with God. And now all of a sudden, the world starts to hear about it on these shows, read about it in our books, etc.
Trump has stated, and he talked about this before he was elected, moving the embassy from Tel Aviv. Already, King Abdullah II meets with Mahmoud Abbas, and said, don't do this, don't do this. It's amazing how the Arab world is trying to dictate what we can do or what Trump wants to do with our embassy. Your thoughts?
Right. Well, and that's Jordan you're talking about there, King Abdullah II, the moderate Arab state, the
moderate one.
Friend of Israel.
Yeah, next.
By the way, King Abdullah II came over numerous times to meet Barack Obama because he is panicking with the Syrian refugee crisis coming in. He can't vet all these Syrian refugees coming in. He's concerned all around him, north, south, east, and west, which is a prophecy in Jeremiah 49. It says that there will be fear all around him from each side. That fear has never existed like it does right now, ever since the Arab Spring and what's going on in Syria and stuff like that. But, listen, that treaty that they have with Israel was made in 1995 with Bill Clinton mediated over that. That is paper thin. They have control over the Temple Mount through what's called the WAQF, WAQF. They do, every time Israel talks about taking over control of the Temple Mount, they've threatened to rip up that peace treaty and go to war, essentially. They were in all the wars before. That's why they made that peace treaty. They were in wars of 48, 67, and 73. They got tired of losing, and it became politically expedient and monetarily worthwhile for them to make this treaty, just like Egypt as well in 1979 with Jimmy Carter mediating over that.
Bill, that's all the time we have for, but thanks for the update. Thanks for stopping by. Really appreciate it.
All right, Elaine.
All righty. Remember, folks, I'll see you either on the air or in the air. Thanks for watching.